A decorator would not throw 100 different textured things in a room. They tend to try and get some sort of consistency in the look of the interior. And you've got to think the same way when you're modeling and texturing, if they're all going to be put together in one spot. And that goes back to the question, I think it was you, Kanu, last week, that had about creating your environments and texturing the assets before you make the environment, or make the environment then texture the assets. You can do it either way. I prefer to have my assets textured as prior to me making the environment. The way you see me working now, though, is valid too. Like, I've created my environment and now I'm making my assets for the environment. But I'm making the assets in conjunction with the environment, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not just sitting here and making all my assets and then starting my environment. I'm not just starting my environment and ignoring my assets. I'm sort of doing both at the same time. That's probably the easiest way for you guys to work, to get everything to blend together properly. Anyway, let's find our cherry wood here. Now, I actually have created a smart material. Smart materials in Substance Painter are really handy and useful to use, particularly if you want to keep the same, if you made any changes to the color of a substance, which are these things down here, these balls, and you want to keep the same color change throughout the assets you're using, creating a smart material is the best way to go. Kanu says, yes, you're going with building assets and then texture. Yep. Which is how I work. I build my asset in Max, then I take it into Substance to texture it, and then I take it into the level to use it. But I always look at the level before I start texturing to make sure my texture will match what I'm doing. And again, that gets back to this consistent look between the different textures, to make sure you're not mixing and matching too many different types of textures together in a space, to get everything to blend together nicely. These curtains are probably a good example of that, because I hadn't actually textured the curtain until a few weeks ago, but I'd had the building made for the last month. And I textured and chose the texture for the curtain based on the room, trying to get it to blend together nicely. So I didn't choose like a pink curtain fabric for my texture here. I specifically chose colors that would blend together nicely in this space in the room. If we go up to the second level where I'm using them as well, it's probably a better look at it. So yeah, I chose a texture that would blend into the room. And I'm going to texture this up so it blends into the room. But I'm not going to pull the cherry wood out from here, simply because I've changed the color of the cherry wood. It's not this brown, I've made it more of a red. And I did create a smart material, so I'm going to load up the smart material I made. Now the smart material has a mask on it, an alpha mask, which I'm going to have to remove. Cool, you're back. Did you get a copy, Sniper? I'm going to have to get a fresh copy in a minute, I think. Now, where is it? Where is my wood? Here we go. I've got this one here called My Cherry, which is my cherry wood. I'm going to use that, but I'm going to remove the alpha map I've got on it. So I'm just going to turn the underlying texture off and remove this alpha. So I'm going to remove this generator as well, because I just want the cherry wood at this stage. Alright, let's get our UV tiling right for this to begin with. So I'm going to turn off lock both of these together so that I can manipulate them individually on the U and the V. And I'm going for a look here with the wood this asset is not huge. It's probably about knee high, maybe a bit higher, maybe just under waist height. Yeah, between knee and waist, we'll say. So we don't want the wood pattern to be too extreme. Like, I don't want to pull it up like that because it's a relatively small asset. I want to make sure that my wood is spaced out quite a bit. And the best way to look at that will probably be the top of it here. Now, I'm just checking this wood pattern here. I don't mind it on the base, that's okay, and the top of it is okay. I'm not really liking what's going on here with this central piece though. I just feel that the wood pattern there is a bit too squished, like it's repeating too much in the vertical. But because this is all part of the one texture here, it's going to be really, I can't manipulate that without manipulating these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into Max. I'm going to select my object. I'm going to go into sub-object and just select that central pillar piece and detach it. I'm going to assign a separate material ID to that middle piece. So I'm just going to pull out a standard material. We'll choose a unique color so it makes it easier for us to see. We'll go with the green. It really doesn't matter what the color is. And we'll call this one wood pillar MID for middle. And I'm going to just assign it to that part of the model. And now I'm going to reattach everything again. Re-export the model one more time. I'm just going to find the folder, because again I like to put everything in its own folder. It makes it easier for me to come back to later on. Painting column light pedestal, that's the one there. I'm going to save over the old version. We'll jump back into Substance Painter. I'm going to go and edit my project configuration and reload that FBX file again. Alright, now Substance has reset my my materials here, but that's no big deal. We didn't actually do any paint work on it yet, so it's no problem for us just to reassign these things one more time. Oh, actually, it has remembered them. I've just got to go back and select them again. But now we have our central piece here as a separate material. We can texture that up with a different UV mapping. So I can still assign that generator again, that cherry wood, not generator, that smart material, sorry. Again, I'm just going to have to go through and make sure I remove the generator and remove the alpha mask. And now we can make sure our UVs here on our central column look correct. So I'm just going to zoom in there. I'm going to start by changing the UV direction. I don't want it going this way, I want it going this way. So I'll turn off lock here and I'm going to change my UV rotation. And we'll just make sure it's at 90. And now we can start playing with that tiling. I think that's better. Now that seam you're seeing there, that's the actual map seam, because I did a pelt mapping on this base. So that's creating a seam. Now there's a few ways we can fix that. We can paint over the seam. But what I'm actually going to end up doing is make sure that seam is always facing the back of the model, so because this model is generally going to be up against either a wall or, in our case, also beside the stairwell. So if I make sure that whenever I place this model, it's actually always rotated toward the back, because it's going to be up against something, it's never going to be seen. But if that was not the case and you wanted to put this in the middle of a floor somewhere, you'd have to go through and paint over that seam. And I'd probably do that in Mari. But I won't do it for this model because I know this is never going to be in the middle of the floor on its own. It's always going to be up against a wall. So that's what that is. It's just the map seam. Let's go through and start distressing bits and pieces here though. I think we'll start with the gold paint. I already started distressing it a little here, just to show you what I mean. I'm going to start distressing it on these bits that stick out, because they're the bits that are going to be bumped and knocked and get the most wear. I'm not going to distress it in here, because that's very rarely going to be bumped or knocked or get anywhere or wearing. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the gold paint layer. I'll make sure I'm in my alpha mask here. I'll choose a brush. I like to use these dirt brushes because I think they give a really nice breakup on the texture for wearing. Why am I not getting messages coming through on my app here? That's very strange. Oh, okay, just took a little while. Sniper is asking, did I get a chance to look at the link? Yes, I did look at it, Sniper, actually, on decals, yep. It looks very cool. Sniper Echo sent a link to a plugin for creating decals on geometry in Blender. It looked cool. A lot of the stuff in it looks like you could probably do in Substance Painter though. A lot of it you could use normal maps in Substance Painter here to do the same sort of thing. But I did notice that it created geometry on the mesh inside of Blender, which is really cool. And the fact that it's actually integrated into Blender is also really cool. Anytime you can stay within the 3D program you're using it is always a help, instead of having to go outside and use a third-party program. So the fact that the plugin works inside of Blender is mega cool. Again, decals were really big 10 years ago. They're not used so much anymore, but the way that they're implemented in that plugin is really interesting. I did look at a tutorial a guy had done on it after I'd checked the plugin out. I don't use Blender, I use Max, so I can't test the plugin myself, but this guy had actually purchased the plugin, installed it in Blender, and was doing a tutorial on how to use it. He loved it, and I could see how useful it could be. He did mention though that that there was some bugs within it, so be aware that there may be bugs in it. But then I looked at how much they're charging for it, and I think it was only like $12 on Gumroad, I think it is, which is really reasonable. So yeah, what have you got to lose for $12 if you're a Blender artist and you want to try using decals? Hey, looks like a good deal to me. Again, not useful for me because I don't use Blender. I use Max. Yeah, but it looked cool. It looked really cool. And it's nice to see decals making a comeback again. Are you thinking about, pardon me, are you thinking about buying it, Sniper Echo? Going to reduce the size of this brush here quite a bit. Now I'm actually going to jump into using the Wacom tablet as opposed to the mouse. You went, yeah, Sniper X says, yeah, I wasn't sure about the deferred decals therm. Wasn't sure about, I'm not sure what you mean, Sniper. Again, I didn't go into too much. I didn't watch the full tutorial the guy did on using it. I only watched about half of it. But I'm not sure what you mean by about deferred decals therm. But like I said, decals were really big in games development years ago. And it is nice that they're making a comeback. And for, like I said, for $12, I think the fact that you can use it directly inside of Blender is a real help. Okay, so now these little pointed bits here at the end are a good example of where you get a lot of wear. So, the firm, sorry, so Sniper says the term deferred decal as opposed to decal. Oh, okay. Yeah, a deferred decal as opposed to I know what a decal is, a deferred decal. I think what they may be meaning by the deferred decal in that plugin is the fact that you can move it around, but decals you can move around too, so yeah, I'm not really sure either. But like I said, the plugin looked very cool. And the guy doing the tutorial on it was very impressed with the fact that he could move his decals around as after he placed them to get them into the position he wanted. It's always very helpful. So again, I'm just going through with this dirt brush here on these edges here where we're going to be getting a lot of wear. And what I've done here is I've added, if I turn off the metallic paint, I've added like a darker wood color underneath, which I'm revealing through using the alpha mask. I'm also just going to delete that top layer because it's blank. Substance creates a blank layer by default, and we're not using it. So yeah, so what I'm just revealing the darker wood underneath using an alpha mask by painting over the top of it with the dirt brush. And I'm doing that in areas where we're going to be getting a lot of wear and tear on the asset, like people have moved it around and bumped it. Sniper says apparently Star Citizen used the deferred decal method as a way to get higher resolution models at a smaller texture size. Way to get higher resolution models at a smaller texture size. I'll have to look into that and check that out. I'm not familiar with it either. I'd be interested to see how they're doing that. How you can get a higher resolution model at a smaller texture size. Texture resolution tiling is usually the way people get a high res model with a low texture size. The Sniper says they also use slightly higher poly meshes. Okay. Yeah, well, you guys know that want to get into games that using a tiling texture, a small resolution tiling texture, and tiling it a few times, increasing the tile will give you a high resolution texture with a small memory footprint. That's been done in games forever. It's still being done now. But I'm not familiar with the Star Citizen, the way that they're doing it, but I'll look into it actually, because it does sound interesting. Like, I know that ID Software had the mega textures or whatever they were calling them, where they used to basically create one huge, like 16K texture and to texture an entire environment up. I'm not sure if they're still doing that though. That seems to have fallen by the wayside, or maybe the ID engine is still doing it. I don't know. I haven't worked with their engine, their game engine. I know that was a big thing, these mega textures that they were talking about, but this sounds like something different to that. Sniper says he's thinking that they use a lot of generic tileable textures, and they use a texture atlas of decals to add the detail to the model. Yeah, that's possible as well. Without having looked at it, and just from what you're saying here, a deferred decal, that sounds more likely to me as to how they're doing it. If they're using a smaller texture size to still get a high resolution model, then they must be tiling the texture. There's no other way you can do it. You're not going to get a high res texture with a tile without using a tileable. You're not going to get a high res texture with a smaller texture size without using a tileable texture. So using a generic tile texture and then using a texture atlas with decals, that could be a way that they're doing it. Sniper says, so less draw calls and less unique textures in memory. Yep. Well, that's the advantage of using a tileable texture. You can reduce the memory footprint quite a lot and still get a high-res texture look out of it. The only thing you got to be careful with tileable textures is you don't get a pattern forming, because you'll notice it most on ground when people start using a tileable texture to do the ground in an environment. You can start to see a pattern that repeats, and that's just a consequence of using a tileable texture, particularly if the texture is quite what's the word? I won't say unique, but has a lot of variation in it. The variation produces a pattern once it's tiled many times, and generally you get around that by then placing another texture on top of that tiled texture to sort of like even it out a bit more. And that can be it's possible they're doing that with a texture atlas, like you said. With a texture atlas, basically what they're doing is they're putting every one of their decals, say, in one texture. So they may have like a 2 or a 4K texture, and they've got maybe 20 different texture pieces on that, within that 4K texture, each individual one, because that's the way it's done in HTML5 now. Anyone that does web development, because I've done web design as well, in HTML5 it creates a texture atlas and then just calls in, references each part of that atlas to call in whatever texture is on that bit of the within that bit of the texture atlas map. Game development can do it too. You can do it in Max actually, or Blender probably as well. If you've got a model that's multi-material and you want to reduce your draw calls, so make sure instead of using 5 different texture maps, you only want to use one, then you can render to texture in Max to create and it's like a texture atlas that way. Sniper says he's going to look at the add-on again and see if he can understand. Yeah. I want to look at what Star Citizen are doing. I'll do a read up on it when I get a bit of time, because I'm curious too. And like I said, I did look at the plugin that you sent the link to, and also this tutorial this guy did online. And I can see how it could be useful. I really can. It's very cool. The fact that you can do it in Blender without using an external program is always helpful when you don't have to leave the 3D program you're using. But like I said, a lot of what they were doing, well, a lot of what they showed, you could probably do in Substance Painter here using normals as well. Yeah, with the tutorial I watched of the guy doing it was doing rendering in Blender, using it to render out in Blender. and I can see how useful it could be. And it's $12. It doesn't seem unreasonable. It's not like you're having to invest hundreds of dollars to see if you're going to like it. For $12, I mean, the time it would have gone into making the plugin alone would be worth $12, I would have thought. Even if you didn't use it for much of anything, you know. Canu says deferred decal renders decal the texture in UE4. You have to turn the debuffer from rendering settings in UE4 to get it working. Actually, Sniper mentioned that Unreal UE4 did support deferred decals, but he said it was broken in UE4, so perhaps that's the reason why that Canu is mentioning there. I don't use decals in Max or in UE4, but deferred decal renders decal the textures. Deferred decal renders. You have to turn the debuffer from rendering settings in UE4. Yeah, again, like I said, though, I should look into that in UE4 as well when I get a bit more time. You guys know I've been a bit snowed under with work with the studio, but I did, like I said, have a chance to watch the movies over the weekend, so that was good. But when I get some time, I'll look into it a bit more. Like, decals were really, really big years ago. It's interesting that they're making a comeback by the sound of it. But I will look into it. Sorry, Sniper. I will check it out. Just at the moment, I'm a bit pushed in time. But like I said to you guys, I'm always reading up. I'm always interested to hear about what's going on in 3D, the latest things in 3D, because it's the industry I work in. And it's something I've always enjoyed reading about, so I will for sure check it out. The only reason I'm using the Wacom tablet here is simply because I can push down harder where I want to reveal more wood and lighter where I don't. Like I've been saying to you guys, don't feel that you need to buy a tablet to do any texturing work. It helps quite a bit if you do have one. But you can do the same thing with a mouse so long as you're careful. Yeah, no, sorry, Sniper, though. I thought you wanted me to check the plugin out and see if it was worth buying. And I do think it is worth buying simply because it's not hugely expensive. And the fact that you can do it all in Blender is really cool. And it did look useful. Like, he was creating some interesting geometry on his model simply by using these decals, so. Anything that saves you texture memory and stuff as well is always helpful. Yeah, I want to be careful on what I say here. Anything that saves texture memory or poly memory is always, always, always a good thing to do. Always. Do bear in mind, though, that graphics cards nowadays have a lot more memory on them than they used to, so you don't have to be so concerned about it like you used to be. You still do have to be concerned with it, and anytime you can save in that area is always a good thing to do. Don't get obsessive about it, though. No worries, Sniper. Well, like I said, any questions you guys have with regards to 3D or anything I don't already know about, I'm always interested in hearing about, so. And I will look into it, though, a bit more because, yeah, I'm curious myself now. Now, again, here, I'm only doing the bits here that stick out, not the bits. I'm not distressing it in the indentations, only on the bits that stick out, because they're the bits that are going to be hit as the thing is moved around or kicked as people walk past it, that type of thing. I'm taking my time on this asset simply because this is going to be, I'm going to use this quite a bit within the level. I'm going to be using it for those Art Deco lady lamps, and I'm also going to be using it for potted plants. So it's going to be used quite a bit throughout the building. I do want to make sure because I'm going to use it so often, that I avoid making any areas that are going to stand out as being repeated. So for instance, I don't want to put a big gash in the wood here, simply because I don't want people to notice that we're reusing the same asset over and the same texture more over and over again. I'm going to distress these leaf patterns on the outside first, and I'm going to come back and distress this curve. So yeah, I'm going to avoid making any large, unique looking distress to the model, simply because I want to reuse it again, and I don't want to have to retexture it a second time. You'll notice too, but when I'm using the tablet here, even though that texture sample is quite large, when I actually apply it, it's actually applying quite small. So even though the brush itself looks very large, it's only applying in a very small area. That's with the pen. If I use the mouse, you're not going to get that effect. Let me just move down a bit here. So if I use the mouse here and I start painting on it, it paints in a much larger area. But like I said, you can still use the mouse. You just get a lot more control with the pen. I may just grab a quick fresh coffee, guys. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. I'll leave you with my Be Right Back screen. I'll be about 2 minutes while I grab a fresh hot cup of coffee, because this one has gone cold. So yeah, I'll be back in just a couple of minutes, guys. Okay, I have my hot coffee, so I'm good. The sniper says, yeah, there's a big difference with the pen versus the mouse. There is. But yeah, it costs money to buy a tablet, a Wacom tablet particularly, and I don't want you guys to think you need to buy one. You can use the mouse. It's just you're just going to be a lot more careful. That's all. So I'm just going to get through this pretty good. Now, you guys seem to be obsessed with draw calls, which is fair enough. I'll show you what we're going to do here once I finish distressing this model. Basically, this model at the moment is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different texture layers, material IDs. So if I bring this into Unreal the way it is now, we're going to have at least 5 draw calls, another one for the actual model itself. So the model will be 1 draw call, each texture will be a separate draw call as well. So 5 textures in a model, 6 draw calls for this object. We can reduce that to 2 draw calls, which I'll show you when we jump into Max, but I have to texture it up first before we can do that. So I'll just quickly distress parts of the model, and then we'll bring it into Max, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm not saying don't be obsessed with draw calls. You should, because it's going to slow your game down if you're not. But don't be overly obsessed with it either. Particularly with DirectX 12, because you're going to, when Unreal 4 goes DirectX 12, which by default it's not, I think it's still DirectX 11 at the moment. But when it does go to fully DirectX 12, you can increase your draw call quite a lot. I'm just using the mouse at the moment simply because it's quicker here for me to distress it, so I can before I take it into max. I really want to take it into max today before the stream ends to show you how to reduce your draw call. So I'm just going to whip through distressing this. You should probably take more time than I am. You can, Sniper says you can now combine textures in UE4 so it decreases the draw calls. Is that in 4.16.3 Sniper? Because I haven't come across that option yet. Oh, you think it's coming out in 4.17? Cool. That will be really handy actually, if you can do that in Unreal. Very handy actually. Because I know that they've given you the option to combine meshes in UE4 to reduce draw calls that way. So if they do the same sort of thing for textures, yeah, that'll be really useful. Again here, I'm just going to quickly distress parts of this model. I'd suggest you take a bit more time than I am, and I am using the mouse, but you probably should use the pen. Because I just want to show you how to do it in max. If you're still using one of the earlier versions of the engine before they release 4.17. They should be due to release it soon though, I imagine. The Sniper says it works similar to the combined mesh feature. Yep, I thought it probably would. Well, it's great that they're doing that, because they did that too with you saw it in the demo? Cool. Yeah, they did that with the meshes. The same with the light maps. So you used to have to create separate UVs for the light maps, but initially when the engine was first released, and it wasn't until like midway through their release schedule that they included that in the engine itself. So when you import the model, it will create a light map for you. UVs for the light map. You can still do it by hand if you want, but yeah, getting it done automatically in the engine is always a better way to go. So the fact that they're going to incorporate combining textures in the engine is also very cool. But again, you can still do it by hand or do it in your 3D program until they actually release that 4.17. And it's basically you use the render to texture in whatever 3D program you're using. I'm pretty sure most 3D programs will allow you to do a render to texture. I use it quite a bit in Max. Just going to make sure I don't go too overboard here. I can get a bit carried away with my distressing. Alright, let's do these edges on these curved pieces now as well. I'm just going to pull back on the texture size a bit here because I am using the mouse and not the pen. Again, I'm leaving some spots open. I'm not distressing the entire edge. I'm just jumping around here and there to do a bit of distressing. I don't want to sort of like create a line all the way around it. The Sniper says apparently 4.17 was released 9 hours ago. Seriously? I'll have to check that out then. I haven't logged into my account on the Epic website yet, so I'll check it out after the stream, see if it has been released, then I'll install it and we'll migrate this project to 4.17. Do you know if they've included the new cloth physics in 4.17 Sniper? Because I know that Epic Games and Nvidia redid the cloth physics, and I've been waiting for them to release the updated version of the physics for cloth before I start working on cloth inside the level. Checking it now, cool. Either way, we will be updating. If they've released 4.17, I'll update the project to 4.17. Because every time they do a release, I do update the project that we're working, the engine version we're working with. It's simply because too, you've only got to be careful of jumping up versions if you're making a game and you're using a lot of programming and scripting or blueprints. That can cause problems, but because we're not really using much in the way of programming in the level we're doing, because I'm only doing a cinematic,